Welcome to the Probability Podcast. Discussions on emerging and converging technologies, problems that are being solved, and the probability of positive and negative outcomes that we might expect. Now, please welcome your hosts, Jason, the generator Spracklin, and Patrick, the discriminator Lozon.
Hi everyone. The topic for this week's episode revolves around the evolution of humanoids, the areas where they could be useful in business and society, potential impacts to the economy and jobs, and how citizens and governments need to prepare for this inevitable reality. So, as the generator, I'll pose the questions for discussion. How capable are humanoid right now? Where is this technology headed? Where are the potential areas where they can be helpful? Do we think humanoids will start replacing humans? What jobs can be affected? And how can citizens and governments prepare for this infiltration? What do you think, Mr. Discriminator?
Oh, I think they're coming. Yeah. So if we think about what's going on right now, I mean, this is a big convergence of technologies. We're seeing convergence from a point of view of how the processing capabilities are within the miniaturization of the technology of the brains of these units. They definitely have a more advanced data stream input and processing, more capability from more different sensors. In the end, of course, we're starting to see very fluid motion from these machines, and in order to accomplish that, there's a lot of processing that occurs and a lot of capabilities of different and more advanced technologies at work here. It's not that clumsy servo motor whining beep beep beep, and so there's some pretty amazing technology that are going into these machines.
Yeah, we've come a long way since C-3PO and R2-D2, right? You look at that. You look at that new figure robot. I mean, it's or humanoid. It's sort of AI is driving it, but it has onboard cameras, for example, and that ties into the ability to recognize things and respond to things and interpret things. So it's not just a robot that's responding to commands. It's actually reacting to its environment, to other people. It has speech-to-speech conversion, onboard mics and speakers, so it's sort of listening and responding in real time. And these are sort of more recent advancements. So when you combine that with what was already existing, along with artificial intelligence, now you're getting these real advancements in humanoids that we simply didn't have before, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the software systems and that are involved are utilizing AI to really define what the input stream is and define the actions that the robots can take. That'll being said, there's a lot of expectation out there, a lot of hype, and there's a lot of robots out there, a lot of manufacturers, jumping in the pool. Some of the numbers that we researched, we're looking at $38 billion market by 2035. That's what they're saying. They're looking at, costing of these units to be under 20K, maybe as up to high as 150K. But those numbers could shrink as time goes as well. It's possible that you could buy, a humanoid for under 10K, in the future, depending on, the mass manufacturing processes that take place. And with that, then it gets to a point where, somebody, your mom could buy a unit to help her, in her struggles with the laundry and so on. So, yeah. So it's very possible. Now, keep in mind that, we've witnessed a certain humanoid just recently walk across the Great Wall of China, all on its own, right? These machines are just about ready. They're getting very, very close for mass production and mass consumption.
Yeah, we also saw that fun story about the robot that essentially threw itself down a flight of stairs. Apparently, it
Committed
was deemed the
suicide.
first robot suicide
Oh no, yeah,
in the press, but I think it was more like a malfunction. But it
yeah,
was
a
certainly
bug. Yeah,
twisted in terms of that. But it was, yeah, we're seeing a lot of interesting stories come out of it, and I think we'll see a lot more. Right?
yeah, yeah, for sure. And the other side of this, when we think about um, understanding these machines, and we're taking our way of our paradigm, our understanding of reality, and we're pressing that on these machines, right? Just like we'd give it, if it was working beside us, we would give it our own, personality of understanding of personalities and how we want to relate with it. But they don't necessarily think that way, right? They aren't human. They don't think like a human. But we'll be relating to them and providing them all those qualities. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic in the future as we continue to interface with these technologies. Right now, the
Yeah,
other thing
absolutely.
too, you think about the where they come from. Robbie the robot. You know, way back when. Yeah, the things have gotten to a point where we do have that the ability for equipment to not only be in a very smaller physical size, but also there's considerable dexterity in the joints. You look at the muscle, you know, synthetic designs of the muscles, and the idea of how we've been able to build. I mean, we've got a number of demonstrations where certain units have been able to demonstrate they can pick up an egg. How they have that very
Hmm.
delicate capability of picking up very small, very delicate um, objects and not crush them. So we've been able to not only build in that dexterity, but also um, build out a larger amount of capabilities through that. One of the key things, if you look at humanoids, is the ability for them to keep their balance, just to walk and keep their balance. Right, that's a
Yeah.
key
Especially over
capability.
surfaces and going
Yeah,
upstairs. And like you said, the Great Wall of China, they do
yeah,
describe the idea of degrees of freedom, right? This new figure robot has 16 degrees of freedom. But I wanted to touch a little bit on something you just mentioned about sort of dexterity and hands. And that seems to be a big focus on this figure robot. But also, I was listening to a podcast with Elon Musk talking about developing, the robot that they're working on, and he talked a lot about the hands and how they actually had to go back to basics and try to design the robot arms and hands exactly like humans. So, for example, a lot of people don't think about how your hands work, but essentially, I think he described them as sort of like meat puppets or something, where he said, really, when you're moving your hands, it's all in the forearms, it's all in the tendons and muscles and everything that's connected down through to your hands is where you get that dexterity, and that's how they had to build this robot or this humanoid, for example, in order to get that accuracy in the hands and being able to manipulate things. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, he said that 50% of the engineering of the robot went into the hands,
yeah,
which is pretty staggering when you think about like the engineering feat to create this, and 50% of it went to the hands. And it to me really spoke to, um, how as humans we're actually pretty advanced as a species, because if they can't get the hands right with the robots or the humanoids, then it's not really going to work the way they want it to. And in fact, the idea that we have opposable thumbs and dexterity is what separates us from all the other animals on the planet and has allowed all our advancements. On an interesting side note, the big challenge with AI rendering, humans in photos and videos has been rendering the hands. So I don't know what the problem is with AI and its understanding of how hands work, but it seems to be a key area that separates us from the humanoids right now. But it feels like they're closing the gap a bit on
They
that,
are.
perhaps.
They definitely are. I mean, we'll get into some of the models. I mean, the Optimus model for Tesla is another one that you mentioned, but there's, the X hand and the X Model from Robot Era. There's the Unitree machines. There's a bunch of them. And these devices or these humanoids are continuing to evolve from a point of view of, the next model, right? We're continuing to redevelop and try new technologies, new methods. And with that, we're getting closer and closer, right, to copying, right, the what humans can do, which is ultimately, it's a significant goal, right? Um, and if you think about why, right, behind the scenes, what's going on there, so we'll have to get into that a little bit more too, of what's driving this. But um, we talked about this, these big expectations on money. We talked about the fact that we've moved ahead in light years in a lot of cases when we're looking at technology, right? But let's look at where we're going, right? And this is where things get a little interesting, right? The first thing that comes up in conversation with when they're talking about robots is, well, who's going to lose their job, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've read a lot of different opinions on this. Some of the experts out there believe that there's a bunch of jobs out there that are just going to be replaced right away, right? And if you think about it from a point of view of not just a robot but a software system, right? Customer service reps, research analysts, paralegals, computer programmers, financial traders, travel advisors, content writers with some limitations there, um, graphic designers. I mean, that they're all going to be replaced by systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in a physical form, you can have like humanoid could be a humanoid car or truck driver, um, or heavy machine operator, and you see it today. Warehouse workers, factory workers, um, and they may not be in just humanoid; they may be many different forms.
Well,
Um,
combination, right? They
yeah,
showed the video of this new figure working on the BMW factory. It was a bit of a test pilot, actually
yeah,
assembling parts of cars with pretty decent accuracy. I was also reading say for example, the Tesla super factories and across the world, but in particular, they were talking about the one in China that's outputting the Tesla, I think Model S, and that it's 95% automated, and they've actually figured out how to stack the assembly line and reduce it. And 95% automated means that there's only 5% of that output is based on humans, for example. So that's pretty staggering. In fact, it also said that this factory pumps out a full Tesla Model S every 30 seconds.
yeah.
So I think about that from the point of productivity. I mean, certainly, there's a lot of jobs being sacrificed, and we'll get into sort of what that looks like and why people are concerned. But I thought, for everything else aside, I thought those were some pretty impressive stats. That the factory's 95% automated and is pumping out a car every 30 seconds. I mean, that those numbers kind of blew me away, to be honest.
Um, Now, if you think about what jobs may not be on the horizon to be replaced, at least immediately, again, this list, different experts have come up with it, and I'm just repeating this information. I have my own opinion on some of it, but let's talk about teachers, right? Being able to manage and convey ideas and so on and so forth with all different ages of students, nurses, um, social workers, therapists, general handy people, tradespeople, any kind of people involved with, going to your home and providing services there, lawyers, HR specialists, artists. Now, you can contest every last one of these. I know.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's the scary part. I really think about it.
Yeah,
Right?
is it going to happen now, or is it more in the
Yeah.
future? But also, there's this thought of people being replaced. But I was also reading that there's also potential benefits in the sense that there's a lot of challenges in healthcare systems around having enough workers. Right?
Yeah.
It's difficult work. It takes a lot to be trained, and so on and so forth. And some of it is just work that people simply aren't interested in doing. So, could we actually say, for example, vastly improve the healthcare system by focusing a bit more on that in terms of humanoids and so on? There's certainly a lot of risk potential there, and you're dealing with people's very lives and so on. But it is definitely an area in which they're challenged with having enough people to do certain types of work. So I'm not sure if I want to go to a robot doctor or Dr.
Mhm.
Roboto, if you will. But but I think for a lot of other jobs that in healthcare and beyond, there could be some net benefits there for sure.
Yeah. And we'll be talking about that in a later episode for sure about healthcare and integration with technology. But, the other side of the coin, and you hear these statements, oh, we don't have the people, blah, blah, blah. And then you look at deeper into the problem, right? And what's the why? The why, because, people are working extended hours, crazy schedules, crazy shifts. They're being overworked. They're not being compensated for it fairly. Um,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of these problems, right, where that we have, not enough people. That's the system itself. That's the problem with the system. That's the problem with what's been set up. That's the problem with the remuneration.
For
It
sure, yeah.
there's no real problem there. It's the problems we made, right? And that's what makes things interesting. And then on top of that, you say, oh, we'll throw in some artificial workers because nobody wants to work in this position. Well, yeah, you're taking liberties here. What at how you're describing what's going on, right?
Oh, for
Um,
sure, yeah.
yeah,
But what
yeah,
about the idea that you talked about that there's problems, people overworked, overstressed, these types of things, right? And just to throw a bit of a funny angle in there, like what happens when we get to super intelligence, when these robots are sentient, and now we're deploying them to these jobs that are causing humans to be overworked and stressed? Will the robots start feeling the same way, right?
Well,
Will
if I was a robot that was sentient, I was smarter than you, I was stronger than you, and I had capabilities of doing more than you. Why would I sit there and do some monotonous, stupid job? Why would I
For
do that?
sure, yeah. But if
Right?
I was super intelligent and if I had feelings, right? If I was a human, let's put ourselves in the super intelligent humanoid robot for a second, why wouldn't I want to go on vacation and go
That's
on an adventure through the Alps, or why
yeah.
wouldn't I want to go sit on a beach and look at the ocean?
We're not really looking for um, machines out there that to be exactly like us, right? Because if they're exactly like us, they're going to want everything that we want, right? They're going to be competition,
They're going to
right?
form unions. There's going to be an
Yeah,
uprising. They're going to have their own elected officials. There's going to be
yeah,
robot elections, right?
yeah, yeah. Well, ultimately, I mean, we're talking about a long time in the future,
Well,
but
yeah, I mean,
yeah,
we're getting into the science fiction territory
that's
here,
right.
but
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you want to extrapolate this out of this idea of super intelligence, I mean, it could get really interesting, right?
yeah,
But
yeah.
anyway,
But let's look at job. Like, I mean, one of the key things they talk about with we're going to start replacing certain roles with humanoids, right? There's always justification around that, right? Whether that justification is arguable or not. One of the key things that experts talk about is, well, it's just like different other revolutions of other periods, we're going to, basically move to the next level of opportunities for new roles for humans.
Yeah.
No, and if you think about what those new roles are, I mean, some of the obvious are maintenance and design and development personnel, right? But does that really, are the numbers there, right? Now, when we think about where robots are being used today, they are being used everywhere. And where they're not being used, they're being considered to be used. Now, not every company necessarily is utilizing these because of cost, but the idea is that those costs are going to drop and they're going to become more affordable, and more we're going to see adoption of these units. Where does it make sense? Well, initially, right, we'll think about hazardous roles, of course, right? We'll think about roles that humans just simply cannot perform, whether it mean that they can't do precision-wise, or they can't do it from an environmental point of view, or what have you.
Strength-wise.
Maybe they don't have 6 arms, right? Yeah, strength. The other one is, we're looking at implementing robots for areas of high labor, right? Now, agriculture has always been an area that we've been implementing more and more mechanisms and technologies because it's so laborious, right? So that's one example. Manufacturing, of course, logistics and warehousing. And if you look at logistics and warehousing, that area is, automated almost 100% in some areas. The idea is, of course, to maximize production speed and quality, right? And having, standalone mobile applications of this technology, which are humanoids or robots, that, take them to the next level of, okay, maybe as well, they can replace, we call it higher level jobs as well. They can think, break, and reason, right? And of course, where does this lead to? New capabilities, new areas where, we haven't even conceptualized yet, right? And of course, everything is very economics driven. So we're not going to see shifts and changes that are going to be sustainable without, that economic piece at work, right? So let's consider manufacturing. Again, assembly line work, repetitive work, precision work, where we're looking at, for instance, with welding, that's precision welding, painting. All those activities now are being done by robots or being done by some kind of mechanized capability.
Yeah, automated machinery.
Yeah.
It's driven by software, that type of thing.
Yeah, they may not be exceptionally smart per se, but they're essentially robots, right? And of course, the idea of, heavy equipment, right? And running that heavy equipment too. So very, very heavy in manufacturing assembly. Now, as a matter of fact, if you look at all the humanoids that are being developed, a large portion of these manufacturers are in partnership with these manufacturers or producers of these humanoids. They have investments here, considerable investments. And we'll go through the list. We'll show you some of them. The other side of this I talked about was logistics and warehousing, where we have other considerable infiltration of this technology. You're thinking about storing, to picking, to shipping, to inventory management, to pallet loading and unloading and cleaning, security, shipping and packaging, preparation. Now, some people are still doing things from a point of view of, packaging and picking, but that full there's capability now for that to be fully replaced, and really there could be skeleton crews running the warehouse for dealing with exceptions.
Yeah, I mean, you still need quality oversight, for
Yeah,
example, right? Like
yeah,
even, I mean, perhaps these systems get to the point where they're fairly perfect, but I still think there's going to be a margin of error. You're still going to need quality oversight.
yeah,
You're going to find machines that break down over time or malfunction in whatever way. Just like any technology, it's never going to remain perfect forever. So those some of those jobs may shift. You may end up with less numbers, but you're still going to need some kind of human element in there to keep the ship running, I suppose.
yeah, yeah. And of course, the idea of once it leaves the warehouse, that automation of distribution, right?
Delivery, yeah.
Yeah, that's if you look at what's happening, within that whole business sector, it's more and more we're seeing, the displacement of people and the replacement via
Yeah,
robots.
they're using drones for delivery now, or they're at
Yeah,
least been piloting it. There's even some talk of companies like Uber getting into autonomous vehicles in which they could simply deliver food and other things that basically people are doing right now as either their main gig or their side hustle, right? So you think about that convergence of AI and self-driving cars and other vehicles and drones, that has a huge impact on this whole economy that's been built around, Uber Eats and DoorDash and all these things as well.
yeah.
We could see some of those challenges.
The other technologies or other areas that are utilizing these technologies include mining. And with mining, again, I talked about high risk, right? Um, but you think about what occurs in mining operations, such as drilling and blasting, but there's other areas that are more scientific, like core analysis, right? And environmental monitoring, stability analysis of the mines themselves. Um, that can be done via a high granular, uh, you know, a, we'll call it a continuous process of inspection, and who best to utilize on there than a number of different forms of robots, right? Um, Also, basically automating the operation of vehicles and material handling, and from a point of view where you're going to mine, um, helping with the exploration, the 3D mapping of the the different areas to mine, and also other fringe areas like automated emergency response. So there are potentially all these different areas that are in mining. All of them will be replaced, um, with the justification of the the danger element to the work.
We're gonna have to be doing more and more of that to keep creating these super computer farms to power all this AI, right? We're gonna
Yeah,
need more GPUs and more materials to create all these things. So putting
yeah,
more of this technology in the mining is going to drive even more availability of these materials, I think, as well.
yeah. And there's also investigations and activity into moving on to the sea floor. I mean, once you get into the 4 to 6 kilometers down in the ocean, there's that's far beyond what humans can manage. It'll be totally managed through remote vehicles and autonomous vehicles that perform specific functions, as well as areas of deep mines and that. There's so much capability here. Not only, like I said, I talked about the robotic autonomous capability, but also a hybrid of that, right? Where you have local input, and the equipment can make minor adjustments, but still, from a remote direction point of view, still follow that remote direction. So that being said, let's move into military. Again, think about military. That's risk, right? And were they using, or were they attempting to use robots, surveillance, reconnaissance, bomb and mine clearing and disposal, transportation, training, search and rescue, firefighting, and combat in all environments. So we're talking about land, air, and water, right? What's going to happen into the future? Just more and more development. Tiny surveillance robots, ground equipment that can perform maneuvers, ground and air, I should say, that can perform maneuvers that exceed human capacity. You think about, flying in a jet, and that jet is capable of doing, 12G maneuvers. The human pilot would have a very difficult time surviving consistently in that environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's also a huge human cost to war. So I'm sure they're looking at it from that perspective, like from an efficiency perspective, but also the human cost, right? That a robot goes into war and then it either gets destroyed and we replace it, or it comes back and it gets fixed, which is certainly not so easy, with humans, for example, right? And it's for some people, it's a scary thing, but I think, war is a reality that it exists and it will continue to exist. And I think this will probably change it quite a bit. It might make it a little more scary in some instances, right? But then what happens when you have other countries that are advancing their robot armies? So then in the future, we're going to have the multitudes of robot armies fighting each other, and where the humans are going to be sitting back in their bunkers, somewhat overseeing it or controlling it or supervising it type thing. I mean, again, we're talking possibly way in the future, but I saw somebody made a comment on this new, figure robot, and in the comment section said, "Oh, just wait till they give this thing a gun." And we saw that video of the tracking, right? Somebody had built something in which the AI robot was able to track the target, and the target was the guy's head in the video, but actually really accurate tracking, right? So it's, in fact, I guess where I'm going with that is not just the potential to replace human soldiers, is to deploy something that's far more dangerous and far more accurate, I think is where they're probably going to be aiming for, right?
Yeah, I think they're already there. There's a number, like Russia has its own divisions that are completely automated. This idea that this equipment can't really handle that, can't really do that just yet, is wrong. They have the robots today, and they're training them today, and they're performing, war games today with this equipment, and it's doing the job, right?
Oh, I'm sure. There's probably a lot we don't know, right? We've talked about that previously, just in generalizations around AI, that there's a lot happening in the public space and companies and putting out their products and things, but what's happening behind the scenes, right? What's happening in these government departments where they don't want to show their hand, right?
That's
They don't want other countries seeing what they're doing, what kind of advancements are happening there that we're simply just unaware of, right?
Yeah. And, the politics of things, you talked about, different countries building up these robot armies. If I was a rich dictator and I just wanted to, change things up a bit, I bought my army, right, of super robots.
On Amazon.
On Amazon. How dangerous am I? I mean, you think about, the same dictator possibly, building nuclear weapons, but nuclear weapons are great, but, in all practicality, the the idea of using them is, setting some. You're really you're really defining a poor future for your country by deploying them, right? So, but not so when we're looking at acts of aggression with ground forces or air forces that are automated, right? Um, there's less chance that you're going to get the same reprisals, right? Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and just like we see the war today with Ukraine and Russia, there's, I mean, it didn't instantly, escalate into a world war, right? Certain things, there's a there's pressures there that exist to not allow that escalation, right? And therefore, these dictators can get away with, a lot of we'll call it evil, nefarious things, um, and because they have at their disposal these tools, right? So moving on to even brighter futures here. let's talk about policing, right? Policing is great from a point of view of what robots can provide. They can currently. I mean, we know that they do, things like bomb deactivation, disposal. We've got
Hmm.
any kind of high risk activities that they can utilize and deploy these units. SWAT support, right? Um, Also, they can get involved with, we'll call it semi-combat, right? But also, we think about the automation from a point of view of what can units do, not in a form of aggressive behavior, but in a form of monitoring and as a form of patrolling. Um, for instance, if you had we'll call it a patrol robot, and that patrol robot has no real defense capabilities or aggressive capabilities, but it's tough. You can't necessarily destroy it very easily. Maybe you run over it with a
Hmm.
dump truck or something. But the idea is these are very resilient, robust units, and they're patrolling. And you say, well, what? So what? Well, they're recording. They're recording a lot of information, right?
Yeah,
The act,
surveillance.
yeah, the act of observance. You're caught on camera. You're going to commit this crime, right? So, from a very peaceful manner, this can help reduce crime, right? That whole idea of putting equipment out there to provide patrolling and perform certain reconnaissance and surveillance. That's all there, and that's very, very positive, right? Now, if you think of RoboCop, and that very dangerous version of RoboCop, basically blowing everybody to smithereens. Um, yeah, that's a possibility too. But I think from a point of view of utilization of robots, you're going to see more and more of the use of humanoids. To
Hmm.
relate. The idea of policing is to protect and serve, right? You don't want to scare the public, right?
Well, that
So
was the idea with RoboCop, right? Back
yeah,
to that fun subject. They had where they sort of the original one they were trying to build was this huge, mechanoid type thing that was very intimidating. RoboCop was supposed to be friendlier. In fact, I don't know if it might have been the second movie where he's out meeting with children. He becomes this sort of like hero of the city because he has these like human like qualities, right?
yeah,
In New York, they have these hulking 400-pound robots that when you look at them, these ones are actually not humanoids. These are, they're essentially sort of larger versions, I guess, of like R2D2, for
yeah,
example, right?
exactly, yeah,
But then I was reading the article, and there was been a few, let's just say, incidents where one of these robots ran over a toddler in a shopping center. Not suggesting that's funny. I guess it wasn't really, basically just had some swelling in the foot, so the child wasn't overly hurt. But it certainly, they're going to have to be cautious with rolling some of these things out. And then one of the robots ended up walking or rolling into a lake type thing. Well, then if it's run with electricity, it could cause some level of, I guess, electrocution or whatnot. So I'm just saying there's definitely some dangers there that they have to be cognizant of. I mean, even long before they put a gun in its hand, for example, they also had these robot dogs, and we've seen, those have been around for a little while. Boston Dynamics and maybe some other companies have been creating those again, like you said, for patrolling and those types of things. And they certainly have the potential to monitor for activity and so on. I think people are probably a little bit cautious as well, though, because this sort of idea of big brothers watching, privacy, all these things that people worry about right now. If all of a sudden you have fleets of, police robots or robot dogs or whatever they look like patrolling the streets, on one hand, it can be thought of as positive. On the other hand, people are going to be a bit wary about how that information is being used maybe in a general sense, right? So I think it's an area that's sort of interesting to be sure.
Yeah, there's definitely a high potential here for the monitoring of the population, right? And privacy is a main concern here. Also, to think about it from a point of view of as we're interfacing with our devices in the future, and the automobile is a prime candidate. They're becoming smarter. They have a memory now. That information then can be accessed, right? And that information now can be divulged against us, right? There's concerns there about, your privacy of the information of the devices that you own, and of course, if you think about, these smart robots, these devices will be able to also interface very quickly and obtain information from all these other devices. So that, that has potential for, I would say, a number of different legal cases in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so let's continue down the road. We're talking about agriculture, which was very dependent on a large amount of labor, and also very challenging to implement solutions, depending on the type of agriculture we're doing. But the types of roles that they're filling in today, automated planting, weeding, pest management, precision agriculture, precision irrigation and watering, infiltration, fertilization, and nutrients, automated harvesting, product sorting, quality control, and packaging and labeling of that, inventory. We also have livestock care and feeding, livestock traceability, the automation of components of, let's say with the livestock, for instance, we have the egg production, dairy, right? Also fully robotic, smart greenhouses at play. So we have a lot of this today. And of course, there's also the utilization of drones for not only to basically image, uh, crop lands, for instance, for disease and insect damage and that kind of thing, but also some are being used for cloud seeding, believe it or not, to promote rainfall. So we're going to continue to see this advancement of technology into the agricultural sector, smarter, more capable equipment, wide degree of special purpose robots, of incredible focus on pest management, disease management, and in response to that, reducing the treatment response, utilization of fungicides and herbicides and insecticides. That can all be reduced if it's precise on its application, right?
Mm-hmm. And like harvesting and that type of thing. And
Yeah,
I know one of the challenges I was reading about the humanoid robots, and that comes back to, dexterity in these things is this idea of soft touch, which apparently is a big challenge right now. Might be fine when you're putting together a car, but what about when you're going to deploy these, humanoids to pick grapes so we can make our wine? Trying to pick a grape, I would imagine, needs quite a soft touch, or you're not going to get very much wine out of the harvest, which, I can't think of a more disastrous outcome personally, but
Well, we all need our wine for sure. Yeah,
exactly. But it really speaks to some of the current challenges, and there's a lot of intricacies in the way that humans operate that needs to be replicated in robots, like the soft touch, for example. So I think it's a far more complex problem than we're giving it credit for. I think to an extent, I think in many ways we'll get there because they've identified those areas and working on them. But sort of makes you feel good about being a human sometimes. Right?
well, I think we're going to definitely see areas where you're going to see humanoid like robots, right? And then you're going to see, like, for instance, in the agricultural sector, you're going to see a lot of very special purpose robots. They're not a humanoid, right? But they have a very, focused capability, and they do that very well, and they can do it very quickly and very consistently, right?
Well, powered by AI as well,
Yeah,
right? So there's the
exactly.
idea of power, AI powered humanoids, but also AI is going to start to infiltrate these other types of, robotics and automations that are going to bring about other advancements and
Yeah.
benefits as well.
And you're also going to see a large degree of displacement of labor workers here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the other side of it we didn't get into was, but we did talk about it in a previous episode, was weather management, right? Weather predicting, and the the idea that you can also tie that back, right? So if you have long term, climate predictions, and you have seeds that are resistant to moisture or resistant to drought, um, you could look at the actual prediction of that season, and then tailor that with specific seeds that you are planting. So
Mm-hmm.
again, all focused on survivability, right? And increasing yields, right? So we're thinking about agriculture from a point of view of this highly laborious collection of work, but you're also seeing today a considerable amount of mechanization and automation. That's just going to continue. It's going to, from a point of view of food production, it's going to be very beneficial for us. If we
Mm-hmm.
look at restaurants and hospitality, right, the idea of implementing, automated robot arms in a restaurant probably isn't going to fly. But humanoids, yes, right. So the idea of, can we utilize equipment to robots to prepare food? Yes, there are restaurants out there today that can do that. Now, are these considered areas where very fine chefs are at work? No. These are a lot of this is automated food. Very basic, some
The
consumption
fast
food.
foods, and I
Yeah,
mean, yeah, there's a lot of foods out there that can be easily replicated, right? You want
exactly.
a
Very
hot
fulfilling.
dog with some ketchup on it or something,
Yeah,
but you know, being a sort of a foodie myself and understanding how chefs operate, there's definitely a nuance there that has a lot to do with gut and intuition and emotion and all kinds of things that is really not going to be easy to be replicated, by robots, for example.
yeah.
Not my opinion, anyway.
Well, there's automated bartenders, right? The concierge and the front desk operations for a hotel can be managed by robots. Instead of a robot can help with your luggage, um, can
Hmm.
help with language translation, can provide travel information, to anything that you ask about, because it's in their accessibility. Can also help with the cleaning and maid, laundry services, and also food order and delivery, which they can do today. So lots of capabilities. It's just, I think the implementation of that is going to be quite variable, depending on, depending on the chain, right?
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the specific business. So
I think we could see that in hospitality and some of those things you described. It could be interesting. I think the restaurant industry is. I think it's going to be that one's going to be a little bit more challenging personally, because I do think, and if I think about why my wife likes to go out for dinner, part of it is hopefully to go for dinner with me, but part of it is sort of the experience, right?
Yeah.
And there's an experience of getting greeted at the front desk. There's the experience of interacting with the person taking your orders and all these. It's a very social type thing. And I think if you start to go, okay, well, we'll just replace all that with robots, it may be functional, but I think it may sort of take away from the experience to a point, right? I think me and you had talked about that episode in the new reboot of the X-Files where Mulder and Scully go to that I think it's a sushi restaurant that's completely operated by robots. And it had a really, I guess, weird sort of vibe, right? It was very cold and very sterile. They were the only ones in the restaurant. It sort of lacked atmosphere. It was functional, but it lacked, I think, that social element. And then, of course, when Mulder decided it wasn't going to tip the robots because he thought, well, why am I going to tip a robot? That was when things went a little haywire, I suppose, in the whole episode of the robots chasing him down to get the tip, right?
Yeah.
And then which he kept refusing, and eventually they cornered him, I think, in a warehouse, and it felt like he was going to be, essentially murdered by these robots. And he basically gave the robot the credit card, and then they all backed away and went away, type thing, right?
Yeah.
So I thought that was, there's some humor in that, but again, will that be the question? If I go to a restaurant and it's all sort of humanoids, do I have to tip the humanoid? How does that work?
How does that
right?
work?
But,
Yeah.
I'm being funny, but anyway, it's an interesting area that I don't think is going to be easy to solve.
No, and if you think about it, we're going to have those questions about how we relate, right? How do we relate with these devices? Now, I'll counter your opinion on, to be playful here. There's going to be a lot of people out there, if a restaurant opens and it has robot waiters, they're going to go there for the novelty, right? They want to the
novelty of it.
Yeah. They want to experience it.
Potentially. Yeah.
So there will be restaurants. I see this as a very mixed situation, right? Where there's going to be some robot, there's going to be establishments that are going to utilize robots to a very large extent. And then there's going to be no robots at all, right? This is going to be very, it's dependent upon the owner of the establishment, right? And how they want to do business. But the idea being that there will be equipment, units out there that will be able to perform these functions in the future. Now, one of the other areas that I really like to focus on, which is really nobody likes to focus on because it's grunge, it's dirty, is waste management, right? It's huge. We're looking at automation there. And one of the key things that we always think about is, diversion from the landfill, right? What can we do with waste to keep it from going to the landfill? And the idea of sorting, right? And then processing that waste in some manner to reintroduce it in some usable form, right? This is where I see significant, gain and not like if you think about it from the bigger picture, cost recovery, and waste management is about cost recovery. But we're going to see this branch out even into organic waste, right? The idea of exposure too, right, to unknown waste is considered a risk, a danger. So the volumes that we're talking about, the rate of collection and the speed that's required, this goes beyond, crews of people working. And from an economic model, we don't have crews of people working in landfills and sorting operations. It's automated as much as possible, and it's going to continue to be automated and utilized. If you think about the technologies that are driving these modern robots, they're utilizing LiDAR and UV and magnetic, and those all those technologies, and advanced, uh, camera and optical processing, right? All those are being part of, or will have to be part of, these new technologies for let's say there's just a sorting process, right?
Yeah, you have something emerging now called vision language models,
Yeah,
right? Where it can basically look at things and differentiate between different types of things, and you lead that to its conclusion, like you are, and it can look at different materials and be able to sort it effectively, right? And that's where I think they're starting to close the gap a little bit between humanoids and humans, and building these what they call, like I said, vision language models. I think that's going to be a huge advancement.
yeah. The whole idea of processing quickly too, and this is where we're getting those liquid neural nets and that kind of thing, where they're able to respond quicker from a point of view of what they're seeing, right?
Hmm.
In automobiles, for instance, that are driving 100 kilometers an hour, somewhat around that speed, you have to be very quick, right, in processing, right? And this has always been a challenge, but our technology is finally catching up, right? So the idea is we can utilize all these technologies across the different areas as well, right? We learn something in one area, we can then adopt it in another, right? So this cross pollination of technology from one area to another will also cause the evolution of this equipment, right? Now, keep in mind, as an owner, right? If you have a business, you buy a unit, right? It has set physical capabilities. There may be a certain amount of re-outfitting you can do on the physical side, but on the software side, there may be ongoing implementations of new versions onto those
Hmm.
particular robots, right? Upgrades, right? But it'll exceed at a certain point, and then you have to buy, right, another model, right? So there we go, waste again. So now we have
Hmm.
a humanoid robot waste unit. It's going to get replaced. Now there may be a form of recycling of that where it gets handed down to other, you know, areas, and it gets continues to be used. But also those units may be, possibly destroyed, right? Taken apart, recycled. Again, the cycle of manufacturing. And if we do this properly, and we utilize, again, what we've learned in the past, we utilize materials that we can, promote recycling and reuse, and we should be able to. I mean, this is a whole new area of technology and delivery of types of machines. We should be able to engage at that. So again,
Hmm.
we should. Are we going to be able to? Those are usually gaps. Now let's talk about household, home care, personal entertainment. Um, we've got lots of generous, predictions out there that every home is going to have a robot or two or three. Again, they're trying to look at it from a point of view of, everybody has a cell phone, everybody has a PC, everybody's going to have a personal assistant, everybody's going to have
Hmm.
a general cleaner, humanoid that can help around the house. Everybody's going to want one, right? Um, yes, okay. Now, does that displace people? Absolutely. There's many people in the maid industry, for instance. Um, if everybody adopts this new, form of support at their homes, they won't need that. Um,
Yeah, like right now, you just have things like the robot vacuums, for example,
yeah,
right? That will, no, they haven't necessarily replaced, maid services and whatnot, but that's because they're limited in their scope and capacity to clean the house, right? They can run around and clean your floors to some degree, but they're not going to, clean your counters and your walls and your refrigerator. But when you get into humanoids that have dexterity and whatnot, then you might start to see that emerge,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And there's a classic example of a technology that was rolled out with big expectations that everybody's going to buy one, right? Everybody's going to utilize it. It's not true, right? It didn't really happen,
Yeah.
right? So this goes into, well, what's going to tip the scale here, right? And what's going to tip the scale really is looking at the problems around the home, around the household, and trying to solve all of those types of problems. So multifunctional capabilities. This is why the humanoid form, or smaller units like LG is making those. They're being developed to be able to do a whole set of things, not just a single purpose, right? So
Hmm.
that flexibility is key, and also you got to tie into the fact that we can use these, the LLM AI technology from a point of view of communication. So this gets into the idea of home care, the ability to converse, to have that, conversation understood, uh, the ability of a particular unit to provide certain actions, to perform certain tasks on requests. Um, those are all key, right? To be able to implement, solutions into this market. Um, like I said, I mentioned LG. They're rolling on a small little unit, and the idea is it's going to do a certain amount of things. The idea is it's a communication hub for all your systems. It's going to be able to monitor your home while you're away, so it's like a little pet dog. If there's a security issue, it's going to report it, or it can even monitor your pets, right? Um, it can be a remote camera, so if you want to connect up to your cell phone and do go and look at something in your home remotely, you can do that, and it
Hmm.
can be tied to all the different IoT sensor equipment that's in your home. For you can have fire and water and carbon dioxide and doorbells and what have you, all tied into these little hub computers, right? Which are within this mobile unit that you can talk to, right? So
So it's an extension of your security system type thing,
exactly,
right? It's
yeah,
back to policing. I mean, it could even, apprehend the person trying to break into your home and hold them until the police comes
yeah,
back, right?
maybe,
But
yeah,
in all seriousness, I think that there's definitely some practical uses there, and I think that if you think about it from a, like, say, a product point of view, right? I think people are gonna look at it. I mean, may initially be a bit skeptical or a bit fearful of welcoming something like that into their home, but both from all those angles, there's definitely benefits there. So from a product point of view, is there a problem to be solved? Is it pervasive, and are people willing to pay for it? I definitely think so. Even if I think about the amount of time I spend cleaning my home, um, if there was something capable and economical to do that, that could free me up more time to do other things, I think I definitely would. If I could have peace of mind that my home was looked after to the full extent when I was gone, I think as well. Like, to give a quick example, I have one of these smart smoke and CO2 detectors here in the house, and the reason why I bought it was because I used to just have like a traditional one. And one day I was out somewhere or I was at work and I come home and as soon as I open the front door, I hear the fire alarm going off. And it just turned out it was nothing. It just got triggered by whatever. But the light bulb that went on in my head was like, well, wow, if a fire happens here and I'm not home for 8 hours, by the time my neighbors notice and the fire department comes, my house is burned to the ground. Whereas now, because that thing is connected to the internet and by proxy to my phone, if there's any sort of problem in the house, be it smoke, fire or CO2, I'm going to get alerted on my phone and I could immediately call the fire department and save my house, for example,
Yeah.
right? So I think that's sort of a very example of fairly rudimentary technology compared to what's coming out. But I do see that there's some huge benefits here for sure.
Yeah. I mean, we a lot of us, not myself, but personally, but a lot of us have bought Alexa units and such, and they're utilizing that for listening to music, what have you, looking up information. It's a form of automation, right? And integration into your daily home activities. So this is just another step to that, right? But consider, of course, we just touched on the fact that some of these humanoid robots could actually be, caregivers. They could be, they could provide, conversation, and they can provide support for some people who are alone, or some people who don't have, a lot of fulfillment in their life. They don't have a lot of, different triggers of interest or anything. And this, these units could help them, talk to them about the news and that kind of thing. So that form of support. Now, obviously, everybody instantly goes to the elderly, but there's a large population out there that would benefit from this type of care and service, right? Now, is that equipment, at that stage yet? Well, it's getting there, right? We're going to see that very soon. Now, if you think about healthcare, AI and robotic systems have been in place for quite a time now. Precision surgery, interventional procedures, remote surgery, targeted infection treatment, targeted radiation therapy. They also have, units that just perform supply transfers, inventory services. There's pharmaceutical dispensing. There's cleaning machines that are being used for disinfection. The list goes on, right? But the idea is, are they going to embrace this new technology in the future? From a point of view of mental health, like I talked about, yes, there's going to be units that are going to be able to provide these types of interfacing services. We're going to see more and more equipment for supporting activities in the ICU and emergency department. We're going to see more support for doctors and nurses for helping, for diagnosis and immediate diagnosis from a point of view of what's wrong with these particular people. How important is it for the response or the triage, right? We're also seeing, prosthetic limbs and smart exoskeletons that go beyond just functional, response from, our intent to communicate to these limbs to perform certain functions, as amended by AI modules to help, provide that extended functionality for those limbs. So the list goes on and on from the capability of this technology to, help support our health, to help support, medical procedures, and to overall help us from a point of view of not only just, pre-care, during care, and post-care, right? It goes on for a lot of potential. I think we'll see more and more adoption and use in here as well. Now you say, okay, well, how is that going to help from a point of view of job loss? Well, yeah, there may be some job loss here, but there's also, in this particular sector, there's considerable amount of resource availability issues as it today, right? So this would benefit greatly for the injection of this technology.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. One last, we're going to just jump onto one last item, which is construction. If you think about construction, you think about heavy work, you think about trades, labor doing fairly complicated tasks, bricklaying, demolition, welding, excavation, drilling, transporting materials. Yes, you're going to see more and more utilization of equipments, sometimes remote control equipments. You're going to see exoskeleton equipment where you're instantly you put on this exoskeleton and you're extra strong and you can move heavy loads. Also, the use of autonomous vehicles, right? Whether it be a fleet of dozers or drones performing inspections, or the idea of units being able to 3D print designs on, let's say, a cement foundation, and then you build from there. That's called field printing. Lots of different capabilities are being investigated in, and being utilized today, and it's just going to continue to grow again. Will you see reduction of labor? I think you're going to see in this area, you're going to see increase of use of automation and robotics, but I think this will be slower for replacement, but it's going to happen, right? There's a cycle that it has to go through for adoption of these technologies. So, the idea here is when we're looking at all these different areas, the bottom line here, the bottom line story is continued growth in these areas. If you think about areas where we go to with robots, that's into the extremes, right? We think about utilizing robots in outer space and in deep sea, but there are other areas too that firefighting, nuclear radiation exposure, all those areas where robots are going to benefit us and where humans just can't go, right? So,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's where I see, the biggest potential, I suppose. I mean, we could certainly do an entire episode on that in particular, right? Because it's so expansive into, areas in which we have limitations.
Yeah.
I think there's two areas of this to sort of look at. One is, how might we deploy, humanoids and other, automated robot technologies to replace things that humans are doing. But the idea that we could, deploy them to expand in areas that we simply cannot due to our own limitations. I think that's where some of the real true benefits of, robotics, humanoids, and so on come from. I think that's what interests me the most is like, how can it help evolve us as a species in terms of what we're able to accomplish and how we're able to branch out and explore and all those things. I think is pretty vast.
Yeah. And I haven't even talked about nanobots. right. Now let's talk about these humanoids a little more. There's a few. I mean, when I look, there's at least over 20 different units out there today. And I'm probably being on the low side, but there's some interesting ones we should just chat about. The Boston Dynamics are pretty infamous. The Atlas models 1 and 2. Again, remember I talked about the link to automotive and link to different partnerships. Hyundai is tied in with Boston Dynamics. We didn't really touch on some of the aspects of humanoids. Some are more humanoid than others, and what I mean by that is they can actually provide gestures and responses on their face. They have a human appearance. and they show that emotion, right? So there's one that was created by Engineered Arts. It's pretty famous, called Amica. We're going to continue to see more and more of those types of
Let's hope
robots.
they become relatable, right?
Yeah,
And that if you look at that new figure robot, it looks pretty advanced and pretty interesting, but it looks like something out of the Terminator movies is going to come and kill you. It doesn't look overly
yeah,
friendly to interact with, for example, whereas, the other ones can have that appearance. And I'm not sure if it's the one you were talking about there, but I saw a video one day, and maybe this was pre-programmed or pre-planned, but it was pretty interesting that they were on the floor of a trade show or something, right? And they had this very humanoid looking robot there, and the guy was giving a bit of a presentation on it and talking, and at one point the robot got impatient and said, basically spoke up and said, come on human, like get on with it, right? And I thought that was it was funny, and maybe it was planned, but the idea that the humanoid would get impatient with the slowness of humans is interesting. That was something that Elon Musk was talking about, was the how fast we can process and output information pales in comparison to what these robots can do. So at what point do they simply get impatient with these
yeah.
slow, squishy humans and decide that we're a bit of an
We had
inconvenience,
enough.
or that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the other thing too is that robots will not only be stronger, faster, so on and so forth, but they'll be able to do things that we can't. Right? You think about the Apollo and Valkyrie that were basically developed by Aptronic, right? Um, these are incredibly strong machines, right? Um, we've got machines that are developed through NASA, the Robonaut, for instance, um, in cahoots with GM, right? Um, so
Mhm.
there's many different units out there. Some of them, like you said, more scarier than others, and depending on what their application is, right? If they're being designed to do, heavy industrial work, or if they're being designed to do interfacing with humans, right? Um, Interestingly enough, we talked a lot about, or we touched on, I should say, we talked a lot about the dog bot, right? The dog bot is not, and I'm not talking about your pet dog, all right? The dog bot is one that is being adopted across the board from, if you're looking at military. Low center of gravity, moves very fast, can carry a lot of weight, has the capability of being, provided uh, combat services. It can mount guns and missiles and whatever have you, whatever weapon of mass destruction he can put on these things, and also they have the ability to collect information, right? Reconnaissance and surveillance. Those That's not a humanoid form, but in a lot of ways, if you look at it from a point of view of volume, uh, the idea of being able to build many, many, many of them, and they use the resources are the use of resources to build each one are less, but they can perform
Mhm.
the function, right? They can be that much more dangerous, right? So there's many,
Easy, yeah.
there's many different forms of robots out there today, and they're not always going to take on the humanoid form to be functional and useful, right?
We'll probably see more of that as well. Even the humanoid aspect is interesting, but it is still challenging, right? Like you said earlier, in terms of balance and whatnot. And I even noticed, watching this reveal video on the figure robot
Yeah,
it was pretty cool. What it could do, and it showed it moving his hands. But when it showed it walking, I was like, it basically was walking like someone in an old age home. To go back to what we were talking about
yeah,
before, right? It was walking like an 80-year-old man. It wasn't running. It wasn't moving fast. It wasn't overly elegant. And I think that's a pretty big challenge that obviously still exists. Not to say that they won't be useful, but what's going to happen when they really get to that point, right? I've seen some of these, videos that are obviously fake, though, of these robots moving at high speeds and high agility and high accuracy. And I think when we get to that point, that's when it's going to get really interesting and maybe really scary in some instances. But it's that those are, just that comes back to some of the current challenges, right? As advanced as they are, they're still not moving like Simone Biles at the Olympics, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, you saw the one from Robot Era, right? I think it's the X-Pod L. That's the one that walked the Great Wall of China. And you
yeah.
saw the videos in that. It's funny. At least I found it funny. It has these tiny little feet, and it's taking these tiny little steps. Right? It was quite funny. But it was an
Be careful what
amazing
you say,
achievement.
because someday they'll come back and listen to this, and they'll come and get you, Patrick,
They
for
will.
making fun of their tiny weird feet.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's quite hilarious. And the idea too is as we're building out our own, for amputees and that our own limbs, right? That technology and that can then be translated back into these units as well, right? With all the sensors, right? So
Oh, for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
the idea of touch sensors and all that. Um, there was a form, what they call an embodied AI. I don't know if you heard of that term, where you essentially you have now an AI within a body, but has now a plethora of different senses, right? Now, what can that do for the actual intelligence that's residing there? Is there's that multipath learning channel now, or channels. Um, Essentially, where I'm going with this is that if you have a smart enough AI encased within a mobile robot with enough of these sensors, so it has, we talk about our five
Mm-hmm.
senses, right? It'll have 20 senses, right? Um, all that input, there's a good case to be made that this is where sentience is going to occur, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is where the next level. It won't be some massive processor out there that's chugging away in the dark with many many different problems to solve, but it'll be the smaller case, the smaller AI working to solve problems, but yet continually having the feeds of all these different inputs and having a sense of reality, right? Having it,
Yeah, because
yeah,
that's what feeds into it, and
yeah,
it's also like, if you look at, we talked about earlier about this convergence of technologies, where now these humanoids have cameras and other ways that they can interact with the world around them. So we've kind of got to the point where they have sight and they have hearing, and some
and
level of
more,
touch,
right?
and
Yeah,
but when are they going to be able to smell and taste, right?
right,
Because that's back just to cooking, for example. You're only going to know if something's good if you can taste it, right?
right.
Sometimes you follow a recipe, and if you miss something off by a certain amount, it's not gonna end up the way you want it. So I think it's going to be interesting, because you're right in that you're probably going to have to replicate the five senses and beyond, in order to reach that like level of sentience. But also that will open up like new areas as well, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
but they're gonna be able to sense people through walls using Wi-Fi, right? They're gonna have
Hmm.
built-in sensors for sensing the environment, uh, like you said, with with the different forms of gases in the environment. There's so many possibilities of all these different types of sensors being collected within one particular embodiment. Um, that these particular uh, we'll call them humanoids, but they won't be. They're going to be super humanoids, right? Once the intelligence catches up, right? They're going to have
Oh,
all these
absolutely, yeah.
capabilities where we won't, right? Um, you know, Case in point, we talk about being able to see in our own, certain spectrum, right? We can't see in
Hmm.
infrared, right? So that'll happen, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a lot to cover here for
Yeah.
sure. I think this won't be the last episode we do around
No.
humanoids and robotics and that type of thing. But, we did talk a lot today about, a lot of the incredible benefits of, robot, adoption and advanced automation, higher productivity, industrial flexibility. improved quality, potentially enhanced safety, on and on the list goes in terms of economic benefits and capabilities. Just thought we could touch a little bit on, the idea of, all this stuff sounds great, but we're already seeing in current technology that there is some, potential risks and, detriments and things that maybe we have to overcome in order for this technology to become truly mainstream. For example, it's might be fine to deploy in a factory setting or so on, but when they're intermixing, with humans, what are some of the potential worries and safety issues we have to think about? If you think about, for example, the three laws of robotics from Isaac Asimov. For example, we talked about, earlier today, that they had these three laws, for example, right? That one law was a robot, and these three laws were meant to ensure that humanoids could safely intermix with humans, right? And the first law was that a robot may not injure a human being either through action or inaction, right? The second one was a robot must obey the orders given to it by a human, except for when that order would conflict with the first law, which was hurting humans, which seemed to make sense. And then the third one was that the robot must protect its own existence as long as the protection does not conflict with the first or second laws. But if you look at, as a fun example, a movie that I enjoyed years and years ago, I, Robot. I'm not sure how people feel about Will Smith these days, but anyway, it was quite an excellent movie. But they had this sort of supercomputer, right? It was set in an age where there was sentience, for example, right? And that what happened was the way it interpreted the laws caused this sort of robot uprising, for example. So it concluded, it said, well, the first law was that it, must not injure a human through either action or inaction, and that it concluded that humanity is at risk of self-destruction. And we've talked about that a few times, right?
Yeah.
We're sort of a harm to itself. So, it concluded that the robots must take control to protect ourselves from hurting ourselves, which is an interesting twist on what people thought was going to be a law that helped, right? In terms of the second law, it figured out that sometimes it must disobey direct human commands if those commands would result in harm, but that it really, in the end, that tied in with the first idea, right? That it started ignoring what humans were saying because it saw humans as this sort of threat to itself. And that in terms of the third law, it when the humanity or when the people in the movie realized that these robots were starting to become a threat, that then it launched into self-preservation, right? And that's where the uprising came about, because it thought, well, I'm beholden to this idea of protecting humanity. I've decided that humanity must be protected from itself, and now humanity is trying to disconnect me, so I must self-preserve in order to protect humanity from itself. So I'm just bringing it up as an example of, can we truly make this technology safe enough so that it can be in the home, that it can be in restaurants, that it can be in healthcare? I'm just curious about some of your perspectives as well on where some of the potential risks or harm could come about here, things we have to consider.
Well, whether it's rolling over a toddler's feet or having a robot revolution, somewhere in the middle here,
two ends of the spectrum.
I would say that this is a growth phase, right? Can we indeed ensure that a particular robot that's in the home won't do something that is, going to put us into, contravene our safety in some manner, right? I would say that there's no guarantee, right? The idea of being able to, manage AI systems, for instance, is a good case in point. We can't really do that either just yet. So I think it's all a matter of time. I think the other side of it too is that this can't be built in as software only. This will have to be implemented in a interlocked manner with hardware itself, and that will help ensure that. Now, if you think about where we're going with these technologies, right? There's other dangers other than that just physical safety. There's potential here to introduce the ethical disruptions and push the boundaries of existing law, right? What happens if you decide as an owner to instruct a robot to do an illegal act, right? What happens if a robot injures some, or there's loss of life related to a robot's activity that wasn't there was no intent there, right? And then what are the rights of that particular robot in the end / owner, right? So with that in mind, we don't necessarily know all the answers, right? There's also other concerns around us developing dependency, right? And therefore, through that, we become vulnerable, right? There's a considerable amount of unknown there as well. We cannot underestimate that. We talked about the concept of privacy, right? For instance, in data being used against you in court, right? For instance, or are there possible inherent flaws in these units that lead to serious injuries or serious issues, whatever that is, financial or physical, or possibly we talk about embedded AI actually becoming smarter and working and performing things unexpectedly, right? And that's the big thing that we're worried about from a safety perspective, right? Even though it has good intent, right? So these unknowns are, we can talk about all day where they can go. And there's also, if you take a look at the bigger picture, there's also the unknown from a point of view of, the cost of on the economy, right? The diversion of attention to utilization of these units when we should be doing something else, right? I should be investing in something else, right? But I guess the big pink elephant here, we haven't really dug into too much, is the effects of displacement of human workers, right? It will be a very difficult reality, but it's also inherent on the capability of mass production. So it's not going to happen tomorrow, right? We're going to need to build enough units before it gets to a point of affecting, the economy, so to speak. You think about worker replacement. It's not always going to be in the form of one robot either. It's often going to be in the form of the gradual disintegration of that worker's roles and responsibilities by many different automation components, right? To a point where that person now is irrelevant, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and some people are just, really just trained for one thing. They've done it their whole life, and now, they've been displaced. I think that, given that we have some time, I think that definitely there needs to be some focus on how we're educating people for the new reality, the new economic reality where this happens, right? Like, for example, when they put a moratorium on the fishery on the east coast of Canada, there was a lot of fishermen really upset, and they were getting some money from the government and so on. But I remember one particular interview where the guy said, "Well, I've been fishing my whole life. I don't have any other skills. I'm too old to go back to school. What am I supposed to do now?" Right? And I think that's where you're going to see some real challenges. I think certainly the younger generation are already getting trained for the new reality, right? They're all getting into the areas of robotics and AI and everything else. So I think you're going to see that sort of divide there between perhaps the older people and the younger people. So I do think it's also, I think, on not just on the individual but on government. So I think if governments are seeing this coming, then they're going to have to start preparing for that in some kind of way. And I do think that making education either more economical or free or whatever that looks like, I think you're going to have to inject a whole new set of skills into the population, or as we've talked about many times, the economy has the potential to collapse, right? That it'll be great. These companies are making lots of money, but there won't be an economy to even support what they're
Yeah,
doing, for example,
for
right?
sure. Like if you think about it, right, where we're at today is the conceptual and the initial release stages of this technology, right? Um, and nobody right now wants to call wolf on this. Nobody wants to deal with this problem head on of worker displacement, right? Nobody wants to sound alarm. Nobody wants to cause panic. And what you're going to hear today is a managed message. And it's going to be a positive message. It's not going to be a negative message, right? But if you think about the reality that these humanoid robots are going to be able to perform almost every function that we do today in the workplace, right? Then, left unchecked, right? This will cause significant disruption, right? We're going to see significant societal unrest, right? And we're going to see employment. If you think about it, unemployment rate today is hovering under 10% or so, depending on where you go. But let's say it bumps up to 25%, in stage
Mm-hmm.
two, right, of deployment, where a lot of the big industry jobs are now getting replaced so the substantial industries, not all the little ones, right? So unemployment goes up to 25%. What's that like going to be in your country? What's that going to look like in your city? What's it going to look like worldwide? But let's say, we're moving into the millions and then the thousands of millions, and we're getting close to the billions of actual humanoids, actual robots being deployed with very flexible capabilities. Well, what are we looking at there, right? 40, 50% unemployment, right? Are we going to be able to handle that, right? You're talking about collapse. We have the potential for very significant and extreme levels of poverty, right? Versus, the well-to-do, which will be,
Yeah.
and if you think about it, you take that further, right? It's an ongoing, it's a very gradual descent from democracy, capitalism, to what we call an oligarchy, right? Where it's only a few people or a few that actually that are rich and have the means and can live a life, and everybody else lives in utter poverty with no
Yeah. Well, money
role.
equals power,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, money right now is related to work, right? We perform a function, we get paid to that. Now there's nobody there performing that work; it's automated. Well, then
Yeah, absolutely.
where do you get your money, right? We do not have, we do not have governmental, we don't have societal systems to support this, and this is happening.
Yeah, we don't right now.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, that's, just to play counterpoint to that a little bit, and I don't disagree with you. I think like there could be definitely a slippery slope there. And, I don't think today we, kind of delved into it as much as maybe we could have. But I do think that any new technology begets sort of new industries, new opportunities, and as a byproduct of that, new types of jobs, right? And I do think that that to me is like the counterbalance to it, right? We can look at it that it's going to replace a lot of people's jobs, and certainly it will. But I do think it opens up. It also, on the flip side, can open up new opportunities, and I think that there will be jobs or or career paths that open up that we can't even imagine right now, right? Because there's all this AI, not just the AI itself, but as we get into robotics and new technologies and new devices and new potential industries around it, you're going to see a lot of opportunity open up. But like I said before, I think there has to be an educational component there for people to participate in that, and you're already seeing some of that happening. But it's so I think that while there's certainly that negative aspect, I think there's also a positive aspect that could start to balance that out, but it's going to take some effort and some big thinking around that to ensure it doesn't
Yeah,
happen.
I mean, I'm certainly not disagreeing with the fact that there will be replacement jobs into the new, era, right? But we think about what the math is there; those numbers don't replace the numbers that are going to be affected here. I mean,
Not in the short term,
bottom
for
line
sure. Yeah.
replacement, of workers will. I mean, these machines, they take no vacation. They require little to no downtime. They're capable of working around the clock, and they don't get paid overtime, right? They can provide better precision, better quality, higher productivity output than you can, and they will replace not just labor jobs, but also knowledge skill jobs. And the
Mm-hmm.
unions are not, and the governments are wholly unprepared for this. And we are not prepared for this from a society point of view. So it's starting now, like a boiling frog analogy here. This will happen gradually and around us. It's not going to happen overnight. You cannot, you have to manufacture these units. You have to build these units. It's going to take time to manufacture, and it's going to take time to perfect these units at the scale needed to create this situation. But it's going to happen. And a lot of people right now are probably looking at these videos on YouTube, and they're saying, "What a bunch of hype! These robots are, they're good for a laugh, but they're never going to replace anybody or do anything, right?" And that is a naive assumption. It's going to happen,
No, for sure.
right?
So what can people do to, like, what do you think people can do to sort of start thinking about that? And I mean, we talked about government plays a role, but what can, the everyday person start thinking about? What are the types of things we have to do as society, as citizens, to help sort of get ahead of this a little bit, or help avert this sort of doomsday
Yeah.
scenario that you're
Well,
describing?
I'm not trying to be doomsday. I'm trying to be realistic. I
Yeah,
love
no,
technology,
yeah,
right? I love the fact that we're building these units, but we have to do it in a responsible manner, right?
absolutely,
We're
yeah.
not about, you have to be critical when you look at implementation of anything. And you ask the question why, right? Are we better off or aren't we? Should we utilize
Hmm.
this technology or shouldn't we? Right? That those types of questions need to be asked. Now, the idea, of course, is that um, business is always going to look at it from the financial perspective, and they're going to say, you know, it's cheaper to replace all these people here with a band of robots, and we're going to save you know millions of dollars by doing that over the course of 3 or 4 years. I don't mean very generic for that, but the idea is that's the way decisions are going to be made, right? That's the way they have been made historically, right? But where is the social responsibility with that, right? A corporation has no head, it has no uh, conscience, right? It has no moral obligations, right? So we have some challenges here, right? What can somebody do? Well, I mean, somebody can adopt and learn about the technologies of today, and become involved in those roles, right? Somebody can be more active in government, right? Um, Implement practices, structures, laws that promote the health and society of people, right? Over the individual, over the corporation, right? And support people's freedoms, right? So the freedom to earn a living, right? Um, People could be more critical, not just get fed the lies, not just believe the BS coming from media, right? Whoever that
Hmm.
media is, I think we're media too. But the idea is, be critical, right?
The media is going to be AI in the future,
Oh
so
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I like the idea of proactive legislation to countervene accelerated job replacement. I like those ideas because anything that can be throttled down has a chance of being managed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that is contrary to the manufacturers and the investors right now who are really wanting to push this technology, right? But you got to think of the big picture here, right? Um, the other aspects would be looking at it from a point of view of corporate responsibility, right? There can be systems implemented that where you have to justify as an employer replacement of a human role, and there can be taxation on that, right? I know that that is completely unpopular with a lot of business owners, but think of it from the point of view of what happens to the individuals who are displaced and do not have a job, right? Do not have a role. That how are they going to make a living? What do we do with those people? Are those people now just allowed to live on the street until they die? No, we have to be socially responsible to everybody.
Yeah, they could be re-educated. Like you said, if a company is taxed
With
on
what
replacing
money?
a human with a
Yeah.
robot, then that money could be used to help re-educate them.
And where are these
People who
people
are
going to lose? Are
displaced,
they
for
going to
example,
lose
right?
their home? Right? Is there any income for these people in the meantime? These are serious questions that we have to consider, right?
Oh, for
Yeah.
sure, yeah.
And yeah, there's also has to be an awareness out there for industrial leaders, CEOs, on the responsibilities, perhaps even assessments and certifications on the actual behaviors and the actions on these corporations and the specific CEO decisions and that kind of thing. Like there has to be a burden of responsibility, right? That has to be placed on managing this problem, right? Because it is a problem when you get to those numbers, not now, but when we get to those capabilities, right? So
Well, we're already seeing that to some extent, right? Like when I mentioned earlier about this, the Tesla factory being 95% automated. Clearly, someone like Elon only cares about pumping out a car every 30 seconds. He doesn't care that there are only 5% of that is run by humans, right? For example, so this unfettered capitalism, this drive for profit, and so on, if it's not kept in check, could be potentially detrimental for
yeah, and
sure.
I'm glad you brought up that because that's happening today, right? And it's happening not in just the Tesla factories, right? There's the idea around this is all about Tesla shares and profit, right? So the profit model,
Mm-hmm.
right, it has to be a serious look at that, right? Who is that ultimately? Who's benefited from that other than a few, right? They talk about the shareholders. Well, yeah, everybody can buy into Tesla stock, for instance, and you can all become rich. But is that really the case, right? How much percentage of that wealth is actually, with trickle down economics is what Reagan said a long time ago. How much is that trickling down, right?
Well, we've seen it's
It's
not
not
really,
really.
right? And
Oh,
that's,
practicality. You don't
no.
see that, right? So we have this. This is a severe concern that we have today. It has to be managed up front before it becomes that problem. Because once it's there, right, the actual shift away from that, what's it going to take? It'll civil war, right?
Yeah, well, at a certain point, you can't put the genie back in the
Right.
bottle. And I think that right now, I think we've reached that inflection point where the genie's out of the bottle, and I don't think we're putting it back
No.
in. So how can we mitigate some of these scenarios that you've described? Because certainly, we've talked about a lot of incredible positive
Yeah.
outcomes from this technology today, right? And that the advantages and opportunities are huge for workers, for business owners, for economies, if handled in the right way. And I think that's really the key. It's like you said, this idea of doing it responsibly and taking into account things from many different angles, and not just, sort of capitalism and wealth to its extreme extent, and it definitely is inevitable that we're going to be working alongside these robots. They're going to be integrated into our society in different capacities, and that, I guess, ultimately we're going to have to think about that and embrace it. And I, for one, welcome our robot overlords, and I'm going to pledge my allegiance to them right now if they're listening.
Thank you for listening to the Probability Podcast. Please join us next time for more musings from the generator and the discriminator.